Good afternoon. On behalf of Finance Isle of Man and the Isle of Man Government, may I welcome you to this second webinar series, which is the Private Wealth Virtual Roadshow. The Isle of Man is a small island nation in the middle of the Irish Sea. To one side we have the UK and England, and to the other side we have Ireland and Europe. We are a very small nation, but a very powerful nation, and we are agile, we are strong, we are stable, and we are secure. With regards to financial services, we have been in this industry for over 40 years. Our history and our pedigree with regards to the finance industry is well recognised internationally. We were recently recognised with the International Investment Award for the Best International Finance Centre for the third time out of 4 years, something we are very, very proud of. It makes a big statement with regards to the Isle of Man government and the industry working closely together. We believe in long-term strong relationships, and that's why we've been doing business in Hong Kong and Asia for many, many years. And if you're considering an international finance centre, we hope you will consider the Isle of Man, because we are strong, because we are stable, and we are secure. When I say we are strong because we have a very diversified economy. We are stable because we have a government that has been here for over 1,000 years, a government that is business friendly. And we are secure because we regulate to a very high standard, and that will protect your assets and that will protect your reputation. So we hope you will take something from this webinar when you speak to our professionals, which I'll now pass you over to.
I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the Hong Kong market and talking about the Hong Kong market's requirements for companies incorporated overseas, and particularly how the Isle of Man and the Isle of Man 2006 Act company in particular can start to meet some of those requirements in the region. Now, the most popular overseas jurisdiction in Hong Kong at present is the British Virgin Islands, and the Cayman Islands is also very popular. Now, what the Hong Kong market is really looking for is a jurisdiction that is competitive and low tax, a jurisdiction whose corporate vehicles are low maintenance and have few obligations, and a company law environment and a legal framework that the market is familiar with, a jurisdiction that's well regulated, low cost and responsive. Now, I think the Isle of Man and the Isle of Man 2006 Act company meets all of these requirements. I don't have time to go through each of these requirements in detail now. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about the ongoing maintenance obligations and how that makes the 06 Act competitive, but I will run through them very quickly. So, in terms of the corporate tax system, the Isle of Man has 3 rates of corporation tax, a 10% band, a 20% band, and a 0% band. The 10 and 20% bands really only capture business on the Isle of Man, banking business on the Isle of Man, real estate and retail. All other forms of corporate income are taxed at 0%. So it really is a competitive taxation environment on the Isle of Man. And in terms of the legal and regulatory system, the Isle of Man's law is based on English common law, so it really is very familiar to the market in Hong Kong. And actually the final court of appeal in the Isle of Man is the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in England. And fiduciary services and fiduciary service providers in the Isle of Man are regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority and require a licence. So the Isle of Man really is well regulated. And in terms of the 06 Company Act itself, company legislation on the Isle of Man traditionally is broadly based on English company law, and the Isle of Man as a jurisdiction actually has 2 Companies Acts available: an older 1931 to 2004 Companies Act, and the Isle of Man Companies Act 2006, which is what I want to talk about a little bit more now. So the 2006 Companies Act really is an effort by the Isle of Man as a jurisdiction to offer a new simplified corporate vehicle that sweeps away some of the familiar formalities of company law that we might be used to in onshore jurisdictions. And I really do think it achieves that. So the 2006 Act Company really is a simplified corporate vehicle that makes an attractive alternative to other international jurisdictions. And I think the key way that the 2006 Act Company achieves this is by its simple maintenance obligations. So the 2006 Act Company only requires a single director, and that director can be a corporate director. The 2006 Act Company doesn't require a company secretary. There's no requirement for annual general meetings, authorised share capital. There's no requirement for the audit of financial statements or the preparation of financial statements unless the shareholders require it. And there really is reduced registry filings, so the Companies Act really has attempted to make this as streamlined as possible. So in any given year, typically it will only be the annual return that is filed with the registry, and that annual return actually will be pre-populated by the registry, really to make this as quick as possible. The 2006 Act does introduce a concept called registered agent. Now, the registered agent being a registered agent is a regulated activity, and broadly speaking, the registered agent is responsible for making sure that the company ensures that the company remains compliant with its obligations on the Isle of Man. So, what does this look like? So, broadly speaking, the registered agent will maintain the minute book, keep the statutory registers, deal with the corporate filings, and the registered agent does have obligations around due diligence and around anti-money laundering as well. And it'll often be the registered agent who provides the statutory registered office, and it will often be the registered agent that keeps the accounting records. And if they don't, they need to be provided with them by the UBO. So I think that's it as regarding the maintenance requirements for the 2006 Act, broadly speaking, and I think it really is a slimmed down Companies Act, which could be quite competitive when compared to other international jurisdictions. I think it complements the pro-business culture on the Isle of Man, and I think it sits well with the well-regulated and low-tax environment that the Isle of Man has.
So, how would the relationship between a client and a service provider in the Isle of Man actually work? Well, Isle of Man regulation requires service providers in the Isle of Man to have a full understanding of the activities and the financial transactions of a trust, a company, or a foundation. But that very much works in a client's favour. Underpinning all of this is that every company needs directors. There are two types of company in the Isle of Man, as other contributors to this webinar have referenced. A 1931 Act company, where there are two directors, both of whom must be individuals, and a company secretary. And also a 2006 Act company, where there's one director who can be a corporate vehicle, and also a registered agent who serves an important function in ensuring things are properly run in the Isle of Man. 2006 Act companies function very much like British Virgin Islands companies, and all of the ease of use and changing things and carrying out activities that you see with British Virgin Islands companies can very much be done with an Isle of Man 2006 Act company. But there is one difference. Most Isle of Man service providers will require that they act as a director, either the entire board or as part of a mixed board. This is beneficial to clients in a number of different ways. Firstly, it means that the service provider can largely deal with all of the mundane administration tasks and ensure that everything is done in accordance with Isle of Man legislation. But perhaps more importantly for clients, it makes proving substance very easy. And additionally, it could very well be useful to clients to prove management and control if CRS disclosures raise tax questions in a client's home jurisdiction. Now, historically, where Asian clients have worked with other jurisdictions where the client forms the full board. That's likely to change anyway in the next couple of years, and tackling this problem now saves a problem further down the line. Isle of Man regulation has required active involvement in boards for many years. The entire industry in the Isle of Man is geared up to do this and to help you. Normally, a service provider will give you a dedicated administrator and manager who will look after you. As a general rule, staff turnover in the Isle of Man within service providers is much lower than we see in Asia. Therefore, you can expect your administrator and manager to be with you for a number of years and thoroughly understand your business. These people will work in a team underneath highly qualified directors who will be the named director on a 1931 Act company or part of the board that acts as a corporate director. Those boards generally have a quorum of 2 directors, so in a mixed board that person won't be able to act alone. The Isle of Man Financial Services Authority heavily vets people who are going to be appointed as directors by corporate service providers and carry out regular reviews. So that protects clients to a large extent. As a last resort, the regulator is very client-friendly and will seek to protect a client that has a problem with the activities of a service provider, but those occasions are very few and far between. Where companies have, say, an active trading business, it's clearly not practical to bounce every single transaction past an Isle of Man director, perhaps because of the time difference or perhaps because of the sheer weight of work, the number of transactions that are happening. So the Isle of Man director would function more like a non-executive director. They'll expect to be invited to quarterly board meetings where they're presented with perhaps a board report, management accounts, trading updates and so forth, and their role as a director will be to discuss the overall performance of the business and perhaps be involved in strategic decisions to emphasise management and control. But they'll delegate authority for day-to-day matters to an operating director here locally in East Asia. Many service providers, including most of those who've contributed to this webinar, also have offices in Asia, and it could very well be that they'll be able to run your day-to-day relationship through an individual based in Hong Kong or Singapore using the language skills that you'd expect to find of the people in those offices, which can go a long way to negating any problems in dealing with time difference and language. Most Isle of Man service providers use highly experienced people with an array of backgrounds, and most industries are covered somewhere in the industry in the Isle of Man. This brings a wealth of knowledge, connections and contacts which should help you grow and run your business, and it will also help solve any problems that occur as you run it, leaving you free to manage the parts of your business that you most enjoy. Moving on to the thorny subject of fees, it's important that you understand the charging structure that you're signing up for. European models can differ from what we're used to seeing in Asia, but again, this should work for a client's benefit. Because service providers want to add value, they've traditionally built on a time charge model. However, increasingly they may have moved towards an all-inclusive fixed fee, which from a client's perspective is about as clear and straightforward as you can get. So, in summary, key questions to consider when you select an Isle of Man service provider: what information will they need on a regular basis, and what's the most efficient way that you can provide that to them? How will the board of directors work, and do they have anybody with specific experience that can actually help you and add value to you as you run your business? And finally, what will the fees structure look like? All of those questions can be easily answered by quality service providers in the Isle of Man and should enable an Isle of Man service provider to proactively help you in running your business.
Hi, my name is Fiona Chen, a partner at Applebee's Hong Kong office. We are an international offshore law firm practicing the laws of 8 offshore jurisdictions out of 10 offices globally. In the next 5 minutes or so, I will provide an overview of the legal system in the Isle of Man and then turn to focus on a special product in the Isle of Man called foundations and how they may be used in wealth management. For those who are not familiar with the history of the Isle of Man, it is a self-governing British Crown dependency and has its own parliament. Acts of the parliament, orders and regulations made under these acts are the principal source of what is referred to as Manx law, M-A-N-X. Whilst Isle of Man's legal system is based on common law, its courts have a jurisdiction distinct from that of England and Wales. Decisions of English courts are not binding on Manx courts, but are highly persuasive. In short, The laws in the Isle of Man is largely based on common law, which is one of the reasons why it has a stable and reliable legal system fitting as an international business center, particularly from the perspective of wealthy families who are always looking for a particularly stable and well-regulated jurisdiction to establish wealth and business succession planning structures. The use of Isle of Man's trust structure has been popular in Asia for some years, and is in many ways similar to the trust structures we see in other common law jurisdictions. I would like to take this opportunity to briefly go over an alternative vehicle, foundations. Now, foundations are introduced into the Isle of Man by the Foundations Act 2011. It is a simple and practical alternative to trusts, which can become attractive to private clients from civil law jurisdictions who are not familiar with the trust concept or who would like a wealth management entity which can be easily recognizable. An Isle of Man foundation has its own separate legal personality, but without any shareholder. It holds assets in its own name for particular objects of the foundation. The objects can be people for charitable and or non-charitable purposes, provided that they are certain, reasonable and possible, not contrary to public policy, etc. Once established, a foundation acts through its council, which will administer the assets of the foundation and carry out its objects in accordance with its constitution, comprising of the foundation instrument and the rules of the foundation. The council members perform much the same role as trustees or directors and have a fiduciary to act in the best interest of the foundation. This is fairly similar to what we see in trusts and companies generally and easily understood. A foundation is highly flexible in terms of how long it may last, how the founder may remain involved in the management of its affairs, and how much information the beneficiaries are entitled to. It can be used as part of wealth management structure, to hold shares in a private trust company, to act as umbrella vehicle, to hold high risk or non-income producing assets, or in recent years, as part of the structure involving digital assets. Foundations do share many characteristics with trusts and may be used to achieve similar objectives, such as family provision, wealth preservation, business succession planning, protecting assets against personal liability, tax mitigation, charity and philanthropy, and other purposes. Also, it is worth noting that a foundation is largely tax neutral, and there is no capital gains tax or inheritance, gift, or estate tax in Isle of Man, though clients are strongly advised to seek tax advice in the jurisdictions of residence of the founder, the beneficiary, and council members. Due to time constraints, I have not had a chance to really go into details of how foundations may be organized and the roles of the council, the founder, the enforcer, and the beneficiaries. For those who would like to know more about foundations or the use of element structure in wealth management, please feel free to reach out to us for further information or get in touch with Isle of Man Finance to discuss any needs. I hope to have the opportunity in the near future to share with you all more insights in the various Isle of Man vehicles and how they may be used for different business and private wealth management purposes. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.
I think to a large extent it's a matter of familiarity. The 2006 Isle of Man Companies Act is very much based on BVI companies law. So everything you can do with a BVI company, you can do with an Isle of Man 2006 Act company. It's viable pretty much in every way on that basis. In terms of why Hong Kong intermediaries traditionally haven't used Isle of Man companies, I think it's largely just that historically places like Jersey and Guernsey have been more visible. BVI companies have been used because it's what the Asian market is familiar with. The problem that BVI companies now have is the substance issue. And for a reasonable percentage, you don't need substance, you're outside of the scope. But for the ones where you are in scope, there isn't really the wealth of experience in the BVI to provide the experience to give that substance to companies. So where you need a director on a company who's actually providing substance, the Isle of Man is experienced at doing that, whereas the British Virgin Islands isn't. And of course, that's only been needed for the past 15 months or so.
Okay, good question. So if the 2006 Act company measures up well against the BVI company, why isn't it more popular in the jurisdiction? Why aren't more Hong Kong intermediaries using it? I think that's a very good question. I think the BVI as a jurisdiction is very popular in Hong Kong. It's got a long history here, and the market's very used to the jurisdiction. Whereas in comparison, the Isle of Man has got a lower profile. It's a lot less well known. I think that clients in the market in general can sometimes reach for what they're used to, what they're familiar with, what they've used before, rather than thinking a little bit more about what they're trying to achieve, what the alternatives are, what might be the best fit. I think it's as simple as that, really. I think it's a question of profile and a question of familiarity.
Personally, I think it's just a case of the way the markets have evolved over time. The Isle of Man has had regulation and a client base that's had certain expectations for the last 20 years. Regulators have required people to act as directors and understand what they're doing. Clients have grown an expectation that an Isle of Man service provider will actually do more than just fill in an annual return and be a secretary and sign what they're told to sign. And those two things hand in hand have just created a sort of ethos in the Isle of Man where service providers are proactively helping clients to run their businesses and do a little bit more. On the counter side here in Asia, historically, it's not been necessary to have management and control provided by a service provider. So the service providers, haven't had a need to do that. That need's now creeping into the market, but the Isle of Man is used to providing it. Asia is a wonderful place to work. I absolutely love being here, but it's playing catch up on this particular issue where most service providers here just aren't kitted out to provide that depth of service.
What do I think the reason is that the standards of service are so high on the Isle of Man? I think there's two reasons broadly. I think one is probably regulatory, and I think one is probably an accident of the market. So the regulatory reason first, I think the two are linked. So the regulatory reason first. So through the Financial Services Authority, or I think it was the FSC previously, the Isle of Man has long had quite a high threshold of regulation. It's been quite robust regulation. I think the regulator and the market, has always been encouraging best practice. And I think as a result of that, really, or partly as a result of that, and partly possibly for tax reasons or market reasons, or the island really has had a long experience as offering what you might call fully managed solutions. And what I mean by fully managed solutions is perhaps in other jurisdictions it might be a little bit more common. A common market offering might be an incorporation service and a simple registered office service. And in the Isle of Man, that's not really very common. In the Isle of Man, for a long time now, offering what we call a fully managed solution is a lot more common for a number of different reasons, regulatory being just one of those. And that is offering directorship services for entities that we're incorporating on, so acting on the board, offering a little bit more around administration and possibly financial administration as well. And so the Isle of Man might be a little bit more used to offering a comprehensive all-round service that can be found in one or two of the other jurisdictions. And I think by through providing these fully managed services, by providing a more comprehensive service, service providers on the island are going to know a little bit more about your business. They're going to know a little bit more about the entity. They're going to know a little bit more about you. They're going to know a little bit more about the history and what's involved. and as a result, they're able to inevitably provide a better service. And I think importantly, this puts the Isle of Man more recently in a stronger position than possibly one or two of the other jurisdictions, because of its history of sort of favouring this type of offering. The new economic substance regime that's coming in, or that's come in, puts the sector, puts the island in a much better position to deal with economic substance regulations, because it's really been geared around this sort of offering for many years.
I'm really excited about the use of Isle of Man foundations because I think they offer a whole load of opportunities which we've only really scratched the surface of here, and I've been meaning to be honest, for years to do a seminar on this at some point. In fact, Asia has turned to trusts in the past half decade in a big way, but there is still the problem here that most clients in this part of the world don't want to relinquish control. They don't want their assets to be held in the legal name of somebody else. They're not comfortable with that. When they buy things, they want a certificate that shows ownership. They want to be able to go to a company's registry and be able to demonstrate legally that they're the owner of an asset. And in a funny way, a foundation achieves both of those things. You can operate a structure that in some ways is a bit like a trust, and you can simultaneously have a certificate that proves it exists and shows that demonstrates that you are the owner of it. You know, you've got this issue with Isle of Man that it's a positive issue, but you've got this issue that you need to have an understanding as a service provider of what you're doing. But with a foundation council, you can put 2 or 3 members of the Isle of Man service provider on as foundation council members, and as a 4th foundation council member have the client. And if you structure the rules of the foundation deed correctly, what it means is that the client effectively, management and control is in the Isle of Man, but the client has a power of veto over what the foundation's doing. And I think that's very attractive. And the fact that the Isle of Man will accept Chinese language as the primary language on the company's registry when you file a foundation deed gives a lot of comfort here, because other comparative jurisdictions won't allow that. You must have the English language version as the primary version of the document, and there's a considerable part of the population that doesn't necessarily speak English well enough to understand the ins and outs of a legal deed, and to have the Chinese as the primary version is a big plus. I think there's a big amount of potential for a lot of clients that are currently using trusts to actually use foundations, and it would be a more appropriate instrument for them.
That's a good question, and one which I can speak from our experience in assisting clients using Isle of Man foundations. As mentioned earlier, foundations can be used to achieve various objectives, including family provision and wealth preservation, business succession planning, protecting assets against personal liability and tax mitigation, etc. A typical use of foundation would be to set one up to hold assets on behalf of named beneficiaries or a defined group of beneficiaries, with certain rights reserved to the founder, such as the power to appoint and remove council members or beneficiaries. The idea is that the founder can retain as much or as little control as he or she wishes. We would assist clients to prepare the foundation instrument and rules of the foundation. This helps achieve the objective of wealth planning and asset protection. A foundation can also be used as a trustee of a trust similar to a private trust company. But unlike a PTC, there is no need to create a purpose trust to hold the shares of the trustee, and the foundation rules can be structured more flexibly to reflect the role of the foundation as a trustee. In a commercial context, foundation can be used as an orphan vehicle in what is normally understood as a charitable purpose trust, where there is no named beneficiary. This is fairly common in structured finance deals, and one that is favored by financial institutions in this type of transactions. Now, these are just some of the examples of family and business uses of foundations in structuring for our clients' needs. And of course, each one caters for specific needs and circumstances, so it's best to seek professional advice.
I think there's probably two reasons that are linked why the Isle of Man offers a good standard of service, and I think one is regulatory, and I think one is market reasons, accident of the market really. From a regulatory perspective, the Isle of Man's got a pretty robust regulator, and has done for many years. So the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority, and previously the FSC, I think, has maintained a pretty high threshold of regulation. Has been a pretty active regulator, and as a result, really, they've encouraged best practice and driven best practice on the island, alongside, of course, the best efforts of the service providers there. And I think partly because of this, partly because of possibly for tax reasons, partly for requirements of the market, I think the Isle of Man has had a long history of offering what you might call fully managed solutions. And fully managed solutions have been common on the Isle of Man for many years. Now, what I mean by that, I suppose, to what might be popular solutions in other jurisdictions might principally be incorporation services and offering of registered office services, and that broadly being it. Whereas a fully managed solution would involve other services, principally the offering directorship services. So service providers will provide members to sit on the board, and there'll be a little bit more around the administration, a little bit more possibly around the financial administration, bookkeeping, preparing accounts, that sort of thing, possibly payments and what have you. So I think the Isle of Man is a little bit more used to offering a comprehensive service, and products that are a lot more comprehensive and a lot more in the round than some other jurisdictions. I think through providing these services, Isle of Man businesses are going to know quite a bit more about your structure. They're going to know quite a little bit more about your history. They're going to know quite a little bit more about what's involved. They're going to have to, because if they're serving as directors. And I think really this sort of inevitably improves the standard of service, because they know just a lot more about you as a client, and a lot more about what you're trying to achieve. And I think importantly, this puts the Isle of Man in a stronger position than one or two other jurisdictions. I think in this new era of economic substance regulations, the substance of an entity, the substance of the structure is a lot more important. And because the Isle of Man's been offering services around this for many years now, the sector really is geared to be able to fulfil this need and provide these services properly and in a timely manner.
I think using an Isle of Man company to hold UK property assets in a number of occasions is basically a no-brainer. I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of a bank that's lending money in London to somebody to buy a UK property, you could use a Hong Kong company, you could use a Singapore company, you could use a BVI company, but the banks are much happier to lend to Isle of Man companies. They're familiar with the paperwork, they can access the lawyers easily, they know who to go to, they know who to work with. The British Virgin Islands is a big negative for London lenders, because it's quite difficult to enforce a security in the British Virgin Islands, and whilst on the face of it that's maybe not what clients are most concerned about, it causes you a problem if you want to take out a big mortgage from a bank and the bank are unhappy to lend because they're a bit concerned whether they could get their security back or not. I'm sure there are other people on this seminar other than me who can speak at greater length about the advantages from a VAT perspective of using the Isle of Man as part of the UK VAT net, particularly where you're acquiring a property that is a going concern in the UK. The Isle of Man VAT office is incredibly quick and agile when it comes to the VAT refunds on the VAT you pay on a property that's registered as a going concern. They're also, one of the beauties of the Isle of Man is that it's a small enough place that a service provider that has a very, very valuable client can go and have a conversation with them in advance, and they're open to a conversation about it. But the simple summary is that the Isle of Man is an ideal place the Isle of Man is an ideal place to form companies to buy UK property assets, just because people in the UK are used to dealing with them.